Hi, I'm Bill Griffith with Emerging Revolutionary War, coming to you with content regarding the 250th anniversary of the Battle of Bunker Hill. Previously, we were down by the waterfront following the British as they land and begin making their assaults against the American position along Breeds Hill. Right now, we are standing in downtown Charlestown. Believe it or not, we are right on the Bunker Hill battlefield. Literally waves after waves of British soldiers and Marines coming through this area, attacking the redoubt on the top of the hill. Some of the bloodiest fighting in the entire American Revolution, some of the bloodiest fighting that the North American continent had ever seen up to this point in our history. So I'm going to turn it over to Mark Malloy so you can interpret a little bit about this attack to try to paint this picture about what would have been happening here 250 years ago in June of 1775.
Yeah, no, this is, and like Billy said, this is really one of the bloodiest engagements of the entire war. And I think it's doesn't get the credit it deserves for the amount of bloodshed that's spilt here. And part of the reason why I think it doesn't become a tourist destination is because it is built up today. So we're going to be walking up the street, and you can actually follow us. We're going to start heading up. We're following in the footsteps of actual British soldiers marching up the hill towards the American Redoubt, which was on Breeds Hill, which we call today Bunker Hill. Of course, that's what there was some confusion as to what hill they were fortifying. But they're up on Breeds Hill, up in a redoubt, and the British officers and soldiers are marching up these very streets today. Now, this concrete and this pavement is on top of the actual ground that they walked up. At that time, this was all farmland. This was open ground. And they're marching up this way. Of course, this field would have been filled with smoke from all the cannons and the musketry that's going on. The British soldiers are marching up this way. Now, they did two major assaults on the actual redoubt, and there was also an assault on the rail fence, which we're gonna come to you live, or we're gonna do a video over at where the rail fence happened. But this is the where they're marching up towards the actual redoubt, and they are taking heavy casualties from the Americans firing down from the redoubt. And like I said, the casualties are larger than you would see in most Revolutionary War battles. British are going to lose over 1,000 soldiers, killed, wounded, missing, captured. The Americans are going to lose almost 400 men, killed, wounded, and captured. So this is an incredibly bloody battlefield. Well, because it hasn't been preserved, most people don't think of this as a major battlefield, but we all remember the name Bunker Hill. And most people don't know that this ground where we're walking right now is where they marched. This is where they were taking their casualties as they kept going closer and closer up to the redoubt. Now, one of the most famous stories is, we don't know who said it, if it was Prescott, if it was Israel Putnam, but somebody told, one of the stories they told is that don't fire until you see the whites of their eyes. And that's because the muskets were not very accurate unless you're about 50 or 80 yards away. So a lot of the Americans held their fire until the British got closer and closer, and then they unleashed volleys into the British soldiers as they were getting up there. And like I said, casualties are just on a phenomenal scale. And like I said, you often wonder, today this whole area is filled with houses and cars and people living their lives. They probably don't realize the hallowed ground that they actually are living, working on today. But this is the Bunker Hill battlefield. And as we continue to go up, we're going to go up and we're going to eventually get to the Battle Monument, which is today at the site of the redoubt where the Americans actually were. But how many people do you don't realize that this is hallowed ground with lots of British blood shed on this very ground that we're standing on? We'll come to you up from the redoubt in just a minute.